Before we begin, I want to know something. Where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Maybe it's late at night. Maybe everyone around you is already asleep. Whatever time it is, wherever you are, welcome to Nockmeyer Witness. Now, let's get into tonight's story. When I was about 4 years old, my dad worked as a mechanic at a junkyard on the edge of town. One afternoon, he found something small and trembling between two rusted car frames. It was a Chihuahua, the ugliest little thing you have ever seen. His fur was matted with oil and grease, his ribs showed through his skin, and one of his eyes was swollen shut from some old injury nobody would ever know about. My dad almost left him there. Who would blame him? The dog looked half dead already, and junkyards are not exactly places where lost animals find happy endings. But my dad had a soft spot for things that nobody else wanted. He wrapped the dog in an old towel and brought him home. When my mom saw what he had carried through the front door, she made a face like she had just smelled something rotten. She said the dog was diseased, that he would bring fleas into the house, that he would die within a week anyway, and break my heart. She said we needed to take him to the shelter first thing in the morning, and let someone else deal with the problem. I remember standing in the kitchen that night, staring at that pathetic little creature shivering on our linoleum floor. He was so small he could fit inside a shoebox. His good eye kept darting around the room like he was waiting for something terrible to happen, like he knew the world had already decided he did not deserve to live. I got down on my knees and reached my hand toward him. He flinched. He actually flinched, like he was used to being hit. That was the moment something inside me broke. I started crying, not the quiet kind of crying kids do when they do not get a toy, but the desperate, gasping kind that makes adults uncomfortable. I begged my parents to let me keep him. I promised things a 4-year-old has no business promising. I swore I would feed him every day, that I would walk him, that I would clean up after him. I told them I would watch him and take care of him and love him more than anything in the world. We lived in the middle of nowhere, out on the flat plains of the Texas Panhandle, where the horizon stretches so far in every direction that you start to feel like the earth has no edges. There were no neighbors for miles, no other kids to play with, just empty fields and fences, and the kind of silence that makes you hear things that are not really there. I think my parents only said yes because they were certain the dog would not survive. He was too weak, too damaged, too far gone. They probably figured it would be easier to let me have my way for a few days and then deal with a dead dog than to fight me about it. So they let me keep him. I named him Ernie after the orange puppet from Sesame Street, because even at 4 years old I understood that ugly things deserve love too. Fast forward 5 years. 5 years of feeding him scraps from the table, of watching him sleep in a cardboard box beside my bed, of throwing sticks into the empty fields and watching him chase them with more energy than any dog his size should have. And somewhere along the way, something impossible happened. That ugly, trembling little Chihuahua grew into the most beautiful, massive dog I had ever seen. He was not just big, he was enormous, with a thick coat of dark fur that caught the sunlight and made him look like he was glowing from the inside. His shoulders were broad and powerful, his chest deep and strong. When he ran across the fields, he moved like something wild, something that had never belonged in a junkyard and never should have survived. People who saw him for the first time could not believe he was the same dog. My grandparents would shake their heads and say it was a miracle, that God must have had a plan for that ugly little creature. But I knew better. I knew that Ernie had grown the way he did because he understood what it meant to be saved. He understood that someone had chosen him when the world had thrown him away. and he spent every day of his life proving that the choice had been worth it. By the time I was 9, I was allowed to drive a golf cart from our house to my grandparents' place, about 2 miles away. It was not really a road, just a worn path through the fields, with a few fences to open and close along the way. The land was flat and empty, nothing but dry grass and dirt stretching in every direction. On a clear day, you could see for miles. On a cloudy day, the sky pressed down so low, it felt like the world was closing in on you. I made that drive almost every day after school. Ernie always followed me. He would run alongside the golf cart, his tongue hanging out, his massive paws kicking up dust behind him. Sometimes he would get ahead of me and stop, turning back to look at me with those dark eyes, like he was making sure I was still there, still safe, still following him home. He never let me out of his sight. Not once. Not ever. The path was simple. Straight across the fields, through a gate, past an old water trough that had not held water in years, and then another gate before my grandparents' house came into view. I had done it so many times, I could have made the drive with my eyes closed. I knew every bump in the ground, every patch of weeds, every place where the dirt turned soft and the wheels might slip. I knew it all. But there was one part of the path I never really paid attention to. Just past the second gate, the trail split slightly. The main path continued straight, but there was a narrow ditch running parallel to it on the left side, hidden by tall grass and overgrown with thorny bushes. I always drove on the right side, on the main trail, because that was where the ground was firmest and the cart moved smoothest. I had never walked through that ditch. I had never even looked at it closely. It was just there, part of the landscape, something my eyes passed over without ever really seeing. That day started like any other. The sun was high and hot, the kind of Texas heat that makes the air shimmer and your skin feel tight. I climbed into the golf cart after school, and Ernie was already waiting by the door, his tail wagging, his whole body vibrating with the kind of excitement only dogs seem capable of. I started the engine, and he took off running, keeping pace with me as we crossed the first field. Everything was fine until we reached the middle of the second field. The golf cart sputtered once, twice, and then the engine died completely. The battery had gone dead. I tried turning the key again and again, but nothing happened. The cart was dead weight, and I was still a full mile from my grandparents' house and about the same distance back home. I sat there for a minute, feeling the sun beating down on my neck, listening to the silence of the empty fields. There was no phone to call for help, no houses nearby, just me, a dead golf cart, and a dog who was looking at me like he was waiting for me to make a decision. So I decided to walk. I climbed out of the cart and started across the field, heading toward my grandparents' house. Ernie fell into step beside me, his massive body casting a shadow that I walked inside of, grateful for the relief from the sun. We walked in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds our footsteps in the dry grass and the occasional buzz of a distant insect. Then, Ernie stopped. I did not notice at first. I kept walking, my mind somewhere else, probably thinking about dinner or homework or some stupid thing that 9-year-olds think about. But after a few steps, I realized he was not beside me anymore. I turned around and saw him standing perfectly still, his head lowered, his ears flat against his skull. His hackles were raised, every hair along his spine standing straight up like he had been struck by lightning. I called his name. He did not move. He did not even look at me. His eyes were fixed on something behind me, something I could not see, and the sound that came out of his throat was not a bark. It was a growl, low and deep and filled with a kind of rage I had never heard from him before. It was the sound an animal makes when it is facing something that wants to kill it. I felt the hair on my own arms stand up. My heart started beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. I took a step toward him, and the growl got louder, more threatening. He turned his head toward me, and for the first time in 5 years, I was afraid of my own dog. His eyes were different. The gentle, loving eyes I knew were gone, replaced by something wild and predatory, something that looked at me like I was the enemy. I had watched Old Yeller a few months before. I knew what rabies looked like. I knew that a friendly dog could turn violent, that the disease made them attack the people they loved most. I was convinced that was what was happening. Ernie had been bitten by something, infected by something, and now he was going to kill me out here in the middle of nowhere, where nobody would ever find my body. Panic took over. I turned and started running, not toward my grandparents' house, not toward anything, just away from that growling monster that used to be my best friend. I made it 2 steps before I felt his weight crash into me from behind. He knocked me to the ground so hard the breath left my lungs in a single gasp. I hit the dirt face first, my mouth filling with dust, my hands scraping against rocks I had not seen. I waited for the teeth. I waited for the pain of his jaws closing around my neck, for the feeling of my blood spilling out onto the dry ground. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed it would be quick. But the pain never came. Instead, I felt his heavy body settle on top of me, pinning me to the earth. His growling stopped. He was not biting me. He was not attacking me. He was just standing on me, his paws pressing into my back, his weight holding me down so hard I could barely breathe. I could feel his heart beating against my spine, fast and hard and terrified. I lay there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a minute. The sun was hot on my face. The dust was in my mouth and my eyes. I could hear Ernie breathing above me, quick and shallow, like he was waiting for something. I did not understand. If he was not attacking me, why was he holding me down? Why was he keeping me here? Then, slowly, he stepped off me. I felt the weight lift from my back, and I scrambled to my feet, ready to run again, ready to sprint as fast as my legs could carry me back to the house. But Ernie did not chase me. He did not even look at me. He turned away from me and faced the ditch I had been walking toward, the one I never paid attention to, the one hidden by tall grass and thorny bushes. And he started growling again. Not at me this time, at the ditch, at something in the ditch, something I still could not see. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back, not stopping, my lungs burning and my legs screaming and my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I did not stop until I reached my house, until I burst through the front door and found my dad sitting in his chair, reading the newspaper like it was any other ordinary day. I tried to tell him what happened, but the words came out in a jumbled mess of tears and gasping breaths. I told him Ernie had attacked me, that he had rabies, that he was going to kill me and I only got away because he let me go. I told him we needed to find Ernie before he hurt someone else, before he hurt another kid or another dog or anything that moved. My dad's face changed when I mentioned the ditch. He set down his newspaper and stood up, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was not anger. It was fear. Real, genuine fear. He walked to the closet where he kept his shotgun, the one he used for rattlesnakes and coyotes, and he loaded it without saying a word. I watched him walk out the door, the gun in his hands, and I knew what he was going to do. He was going to find Ernie, and he was going to shoot him. He was going to put down the dog I had begged to keep, the dog who had grown from an ugly, trembling creature into the most beautiful animal I had ever known. I collapsed onto the floor, and cried harder than I had cried since I was 4 years old, since the night I first saw that pathetic little dog in our kitchen. An hour passed, maybe more. I sat by the window, staring out at the empty fields, waiting for the sound of the gunshot that would tell me my best friend was dead. I imagined the sound echoing across the plains, bouncing off the horizon and fading into nothing. I imagined Ernie's body lying in the grass, his beautiful dark fur matted with blood, his dark eyes open and empty. Then I heard it, a single gunshot, sharp and clear, rolling across the fields like thunder. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. I could not stop. I could not breathe. I wanted to die right there on the living room floor, to disappear into the carpet and never feel anything ever again. But then I heard something else. Footsteps on the porch, the front door opening, and a voice I knew better than my own, calling my name. I looked up, and there was my dad, standing in the doorway with his shotgun over his shoulder, and beside him, tail wagging, tongue hanging out, completely unharmed, was Ernie. I could not move. I could not speak. I just stared at them, my brain trying to process something that made no sense. My dad was supposed to have shot Ernie. I heard the gunshot. I knew what it meant. But there he was, alive and happy, and looking at me like nothing had happened. My dad set down the shotgun and walked over to me. He knelt down and put his hands on my shoulders, and I saw that his face was pale, his eyes wide, his hands shaking. He told me what he had found in that ditch. He told me what Ernie had been growling at. It was a nest of rattlesnakes, not one or two, but a whole nest of them, coiled together in the shade of the thorny bushes, their tails buzzing like electricity, their heads raised and ready to strike. They were huge, my dad said. The biggest rattlesnakes he had ever seen in his life. Diamondbacks, thick as a man's arm, their patterns dark and vivid against the dry grass. He said there was no way I would have missed them if I had walked through that ditch. The grass was not tall enough to hide them completely. The buzzing of their tails would have been impossible to ignore. I would have stepped right into the middle of them before I even knew they were there. And even if I had seen them at the last second, I was 9 years old and alone in the middle of nowhere. There was nowhere to run, no place to hide, just me and a nest of venomous snakes that could kill a grown man, let alone a child. Ernie had heard them. My dad said dogs can sense things humans cannot, that their hearing is so sharp they can detect the slightest movement in the grass, the faintest vibration in the ground. Ernie had known the snakes were there before I ever got close. He had heard them, smelled them, felt them waiting in the ditch like death itself. And he had saved me the only way he knew how. He had stopped me from walking into that nest by any means necessary. He had knocked me down and held me there, keeping me still and silent while the snakes waited just feet away. He had growled at them, not at me, warning them to stay back, daring them to come closer. And when I ran, he had stayed behind, standing guard over that ditch, making sure nothing followed me, making sure the snakes did not slither out and chase me down. My dad had shot the snakes, all of them. He had emptied his shotgun into that ditch until there was nothing left but blood and scales and silence. But when he turned around, expecting to find a rabid dog that needed to be put down, he found Ernie sitting patiently in the grass, watching him with those dark, gentle eyes. The same eyes that had looked at me with love every day for 5 years. The same eyes that had flinched when I first reached for him in our kitchen. My dad said he had never been so scared in his life. Not of the snakes, though they were terrifying enough. He was scared because he had almost shot the dog who had just saved his daughter's life. He had walked out there with every intention of killing Ernie, and if the dog had run at him, if he had growled or barked or done anything that looked aggressive, my dad would have pulled the trigger without a second thought. But Ernie had just sat there. He had trusted my dad the same way he had trusted me. He had known, somehow, that everything was going to be okay. I wrapped my arms around Ernie's neck and buried my face in his fur, and I cried for a long time. I cried for the fear I had felt when I thought he was going to kill me. I cried for the guilt I felt for ever doubting him. I cried for the miracle of a dog who had been thrown away in a junkyard, left to die, and had grown up to become the bravest, most loyal creature I would ever know. But most of all, I cried because I understood something that night that I have never forgotten. I understood that the world is full of things we cannot see, dangers we cannot hear, threats that hide in the tall grass and wait for us to walk by. I understood that sometimes the things that scare us the most are not the things trying to hurt us, but the things trying to save us. Ernie's growl had been the scariest sound I had ever heard, not because he wanted to hurt me, but because he was willing to do whatever it took to keep me alive, even if it meant I would hate him for it. I still think about that ditch sometimes. I still think about what would have happened if the golf cart had not died, if I had driven right past like I always did, if Ernie had not been there to hear what I could not. I think about how close I came to dying in the middle of nowhere, my body found hours or days later, my parents never knowing what had happened to their little girl. And I think about how the scariest moment of my life turned out to be the moment that saved it, how the dog I thought had turned against me was actually the only thing standing between me and death, how fear and love can look so much alike that sometimes you cannot tell them apart until it is almost too late. Ernie lived for 9 more years after that day. He grew old and gray around the muzzle, and his running turned to walking, and his walking turned to sleeping in the sun on our porch. But he never stopped watching me. Every time I walked out the door, every time I crossed those fields, his eyes followed me until I was out of sight. He was my guardian, my protector, my ugly little junkyard dog who grew into something beautiful and brave and terrifying in all the best ways. When he finally died, I buried him under the old oak tree by our house, the one that cast the longest shadow across the fields. I visit him sometimes when I go back to Texas, and I sit by his grave and remember the day he knocked me down in the dirt and held me there while death waited just a few feet away. I remember the sound of his growl, the weight of his body, the terror that turned into gratitude so slowly I almost missed it. And I remember that the scariest things in this world are not always the ones that want to hurt us. Sometimes they are the ones that love us enough to scare us, to stop us, to do whatever it takes to keep us alive for one more day. My dad has never been the kind of man who scares easily. He has worked construction his whole life, has been in car accidents, has faced down angry dogs and worse. He does not believe in ghosts, does not watch horror movies, does not tell campfire stories. He is the most practical person I know, the kind of man who fixes things instead of worrying about them, who laughs at people who claim they have seen something they cannot explain. So when he told me this story, I knew something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. Because my dad cannot tell this story without getting goosebumps. His arms break out in those tiny raised bumps every single time, and I have watched him rub them away like he is trying to erase the memory from his skin. It happened about 6 months ago. My parents had been invited to stay at a friend's beach house for a long weekend, a place they had been to before and always enjoyed. The house sat on a quiet stretch of coast, the kind of place where the waves sound louder than the cars and the air always smells like salt and sunscreen. Their friends had owned the place for 3 years, and in that time they had watched the house next door go through 5 different owners. 5 families or couples or individuals who moved in full of hope and plans and left within months, sometimes weeks, always in a hurry, always with something unsaid hanging in the air behind them. The last person to live there was a man who had committed suicide just 3 weeks before my parents arrived. Nobody knew why. Nobody in the neighborhood seemed to know much about him at all, just that he had kept to himself, that he had moved in alone, that he had not lasted long before whatever was inside that house became too much to carry. The death had been quiet, the kind of thing that makes the local news for a day and then disappears, swallowed by the next tragedy, the next headline, the next reason for people to shake their heads and change the channel. My parents arrived in the late afternoon. The sun was still high, the sky was clear, and the drive had been easy. They unpacked their bags, opened the windows to let the sea breeze through, and settled into the kind of relaxed routine that beach houses are built for. My mom made sandwiches in the kitchen while my dad sat on the porch with a beer, watching the water turn orange as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. Nothing felt wrong. They spent the day like they always did at the beach, walking along the shore, collecting shells, talking about nothing important while the waves rolled in and out in a rhythm that should have been calming. My dad even joked about the house next door, about how many people had come and gone, about how maybe the place was cursed or haunted or just built on bad plumbing. He laughed when he said it. He did not believe in curses. He did not believe in hauntings. He believed in what he could see and touch and fix with his own 2 hands. The trouble started when they were getting ready for bed. My dad was in the bathroom brushing his teeth when he first noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just a hint of something sharp and chemical in the air. The kind of smell that makes you wrinkle your nose and wonder if you left the stove on. But it got stronger as he walked through the house, stronger in the hallway, stronger near the kitchen, until he was sure of what he was smelling. Gas, natural gas, thick and suffocating. The kind of smell that means danger, that means fire, that means get out now before something explodes. He called out to my mom, told her to open the windows, told her not to touch any light switches or turn on any appliances. He moved through the house with the calm efficiency of a man who has dealt with emergencies before, checking the stove, checking the heater, trying to find the source of the leak. It did not take him long to figure out what had happened. The pilot light on the water heater had gone out, and gas was leaking into the house, filling the rooms with invisible poison that could have killed them in their sleep. The shut-off valve was outside, near the side of the house, where the utility lines ran along the foundation. My dad grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the night, leaving the warm light of the house behind him. The air was cooler outside, carrying the smell of the ocean and something else, something he could not quite place. He walked along the side of the house, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, his feet crunching on gravel that had not been swept in weeks. That was when the chills started. They began at the base of his spine and spread upward like ice water running through his veins, raising the hair on his arms and the back of his neck. My dad is not a man who gets cold easily. He has worked outside in freezing temperatures, has stood on rooftops in January winds that would make most people run inside. But this was different. This was not the cold of weather or wind. This was something else. Something that settled into his bones and made his teeth want to chatter, even though the night air was mild and comfortable. He kept walking, trying to shake it off, telling himself it was just the temperature dropping as the sun went down, just the dampness of the coastal air settling into his skin. But the chills got worse. They turned into something that felt almost electric, a vibration in his muscles that made his hands shake around the flashlight. He felt watched. He felt exposed. He felt like he was standing in the middle of an open field with a spotlight on him, even though the only light was the weak beam of his own flashlight and the distant glow of the street lamp 2 houses down. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to go back inside. Every nerve in his body was telling him that something was wrong, that he was not alone out here, that the darkness around him was not empty the way darkness is supposed to be. But my dad is not a man who listens to instincts that he cannot explain. He kept walking, kept searching for the shut-off valve, kept telling himself that he was being ridiculous, that there was nothing out here except the night and the ocean and the house next door sitting dark and silent in the shadows. He found the valve near the back corner of the house, a small metal wheel half hidden by overgrown bushes that no one had trimmed in months. He knelt down, his knees pressing into the damp ground, and reached for the valve with fingers that were still shaking from the cold that was not cold. He turned it slowly, feeling the metal resist and then give way, hearing the faint hiss of gas that had been leaking into the house begin to fade. The smell would linger for a while, but the danger was over. They were safe. That was when he heard the voice. It came from somewhere behind him, close enough that he should have heard footsteps approaching, close enough that he should have felt the presence of another person before they spoke. But there had been nothing. No sound of gravel crunching, no rustle of clothing, no breath in the night air, just silence, and then the voice, clear and sharp and unmistakably real. "What are you doing?" The voice was so human, so ordinary, so perfectly pronounced that my dad did not even think before he answered. He turned his head slightly, still focused on the valve, and responded the way he would respond to anyone who asked him a question while he was working. Shutting off the gas. The words left his mouth and hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then my dad froze. His hand stopped turning the valve. His breath stopped moving in his chest. His heart seemed to stop beating for just a moment, long enough for him to realize what he had just done. He had answered someone. He had spoken to someone who was standing behind him in the dark, someone who had approached without making a sound, someone who should not have been there. He turned around slowly, his flashlight beam sweeping across the gravel and the bushes and the side of the house, searching for the person who had spoken. The beam caught nothing but empty space, caught shadows that looked deeper than they should have been, caught the corner of the house next door where the windows sat dark and blank like eyes that had been closed for a very long time. There was no one there, no footprints in the gravel, no figure standing in the shadows, no explanation for the voice that had been so clear, so close, so absolutely real. My dad's mind raced through possibilities in the space of a single second. It was my mom, he thought at first. She had come outside to check on him, had asked what he was doing, had gone back inside before he turned around. That was the only explanation that made sense, the only thing that fit with the voice he had heard, the only way to explain why someone was out here with him in the middle of the night. But even as he thought it, he knew it was wrong. The voice had been male, deep and steady and unfamiliar. My mom's voice was higher, softer, recognizable in a way that this voice had not been. And besides, he would have heard the door open. He would have heard her footsteps on the gravel. He would have known she was there before she spoke. Panic hit him like a wave, cold and sudden and overwhelming. He dropped the flashlight, did not bother to pick it up, and ran. He ran along the side of the house, his feet slipping on the gravel, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in short gasps that sounded too loud in the empty night. He burst through the front door and slammed it behind him, leaning against it like something might be following him, something that moved without footsteps, something that spoke without a body to speak with. My mom was in the bathroom brushing her teeth. She looked up when he stumbled in, her mouth full of foam, her eyes widening at the sight of him. He was pale, she told me later, paler than she had ever seen him, and his hands were shaking so badly he could not hold them still. She asked him what was wrong, asked if he had found the leak, asked why he looked like he had seen a ghost. He tried to tell her, tried to explain the voice and the chills and the empty space where someone should have been standing. But the words came out jumbled and broken, and my mom could not make sense of them at first. She thought he was joking, thought he was trying to scare her the way he sometimes did when they watched scary movies together. But then she saw his eyes, saw the fear in them that he could not hide, saw the goosebumps that had broken out across his arms and were not going away no matter how many times he rubbed them. She believed him then. They did not sleep that night. My dad sat on the couch in the living room with every light in the house turned on, staring at the walls and listening to the silence that seemed too full, too heavy, like it was hiding something just out of hearing. My mom sat with him, holding his hand, not knowing what to say, because she had never seen him like this before, and did not know how to comfort someone who was usually the one doing the comforting. Around 3 a.m, they made a decision. They packed their bags in silence, moving quickly, not speaking about what they were doing, because speaking about it would make it too real. They wrote a note for their friends, something vague about an emergency at home, and they got in the car and drove. They left the beach house in the middle of the night, the headlights cutting through the darkness, the ocean invisible behind them, the house next door shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just another shadow among shadows. They told their friends what had happened the next day, over the phone, my dad's voice still shaky even in the daylight. Their friends listened in silence, and when my dad finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then their friends spoke, and what they said made my dad's blood run cold all over again. The man who had committed suicide 3 weeks earlier had done it by gassing himself in the house next door. He had turned on the gas, had sealed the windows and doors, had sat in a chair and waited for the poison to fill his lungs and end whatever pain he was carrying. The house had been empty since then, the gas lines checked and cleared, the rooms aired out, the body removed and buried and mostly forgotten. But the method of his death, the thing that had taken him, was the same thing that had almost taken my parents. My dad's friends sounded mortified when they told him. They had not thought to mention it, had not connected the gas leak in their own house to the suicide next door, had not imagined that something like this could happen, or that it would mean anything if it did. But my dad heard the connection, felt it like a cold hand closing around his throat. The gas, the pilot light that had gone out for no reason, the voice in the dark asking what he was doing, the same voice that might have asked the same question to the man next door before he made his final choice. My dad has told this story 3 times. Once to me, once to my brother, once to his best friend from high school. Every time, the goosebumps come. Every time, his voice drops to a whisper at the part where the voice speaks, like saying the words too loud might summon something back. Every time, his eyes get that look in them, the look of a man who has seen something he cannot explain and has spent months trying to convince himself that he imagined it. I do not think he imagined it. I have known my dad my whole life, and I have never seen him scared like that. I have seen him angry, seen him sad, seen him frustrated and tired, and every other emotion that comes with being a human being who works hard and loves his family. But I have never seen fear in his eyes the way I saw it when he told me this story. It was not the fear of a man who had been startled by a noise in the dark. It was the fear of a man who had heard something speak to him from a place where nothing should have been speaking, who had answered without thinking, and then realized that the conversation should have been impossible. I think about that night a lot. I think about my dad kneeling in the gravel, turning off the gas that might have killed him and my mom in their sleep. I think about the voice behind him, so clear and real and human that he responded to it without hesitation. The way you respond to someone who belongs in the world with you. I think about the empty space where that person should have been standing, the darkness that held nothing but the sound of waves and the smell of the ocean and something else, something that my dad could not name but could feel in every cell of his body. And I think about the man next door, the one who had gassed himself 3 weeks earlier, the one who had sat alone in his house and made a choice that ended everything. Did he hear a voice too? Did something speak to him in the dark? Something that sounded human and close and real. Something that asked him what he was doing and made him answer before he realized there was no one there to hear him? Did he feel the chills before he turned on the gas? The kind of chills that come from something that is not weather and not imagination, and not anything that has a name in the daylight? My dad does not talk about the man next door. He does not speculate about connections or meanings or whether the voice he heard belonged to someone who had already died. He just tells the story, gets his goosebumps, changes the subject. But I can see it in his eyes when he thinks nobody is watching, the way he looks at gas stoves now, the way he checks pilot lights twice, 3 times, the way he hesitates before going outside at night, even in his own backyard, where he has lived for 20 years and knows every sound and every shadow. Something spoke to him that night. Something asked him what he was doing, and he answered, and then he turned around and found nothing but the dark and the house next door, where a man had died in a way that matched the danger my dad had just stopped. I do not know what that means. I do not know if it was a ghost or a warning or just a coincidence that feels too perfect to be random, but I know my dad, and I know fear, and I know that the look in his eyes when he tells this story is not something you can fake. He heard something. He answered something, and whatever it was real enough to make a practical man who does not believe in ghosts drive 3 hours home in the middle of the night rather than spend 1 more minute in a house that should have been safe and familiar and warm. That is the part that stays with me, the part that makes me check my own pilot lights. That makes me listen a little too hard to the silence in my own house at night. Because if it could find my dad, if it could speak to him in a voice so real he answered without thinking, then maybe it can find anyone. Maybe it is still out there, still asking questions in the dark, still waiting for someone to answer before they realize there is no one there to ask. My mother told me this story, and I need you to understand something about her before you hear it. My mother is a staunch Christian, the kind of person who goes to church every Sunday without fail, who reads her Bible before bed, who prays over every meal like God is sitting at the table with us. She does not believe in ghosts. She does not believe in spirits or hauntings or any of the things that people talk about when the lights go out and the conversation turns dark. She believes in heaven and hell, in angels and demons, in the clear lines that separate the living from the dead. She has always said that when people die, they go to one of 2 places, and they do not come back to wander around kitchens and bedrooms like characters in a horror movie. But she believes this story. She believes it because she was there. She saw it happen. She heard the words come out of her grandmother's mouth, and she has spent decades trying to fit what she witnessed into the framework of her faith, trying to find a place in her theology for something that should not exist. She still does not know what to think of it. She still gets quiet when the subject comes up, still changes the topic, still rubs her arms like she is cold, even when the room is warm. That is how I know it is real. That is how I know it happened exactly the way she tells it. My mother's grandmother was named Florence. She was a small woman with hands that shook when she held teacups and eyes that had gone cloudy with cataracts long before I was born. In her later years, Florence developed dementia, the kind that does not just steal memories but rearranges them, that turns the past into a jigsaw puzzle with pieces that do not fit and edges that cut. She forgot names, forgot faces, forgot which room was the bathroom and which was the closet. She would ask the same question 5 times in an hour and cry when no one answered with the patience she needed. But the thing that made her dementia most obvious, the thing that turned her from a confused old woman into someone her family worried about leaving alone, was her dog. Fluffy had been a small white terrier with a bark that sounded bigger than his body and a habit of sleeping on Florence's feet every night for 15 years. He was not a special dog, not a show dog or a purebred or anything that would have impressed strangers. He was just Fluffy. And he was hers, and that was enough. When Fluffy died, Florence did not handle it the way most people handle the death of a pet. She did not bury him in the backyard, or scatter his ashes in the garden, or frame a photo and put it on the nightstand. She had him cremated, collected his ashes in a small brass urn, and placed that urn on the mantel above her fireplace, right between a ceramic angel and a clock that had stopped working sometime in the 1980s. And then she forgot that he was dead. Not completely, not in the way that would have made sense. She remembered that Fluffy was in the urn, remembered that the urn held his remains, remembered every detail of the cremation and the cost, and the man at the funeral home who had been kind to her. But she also believed, with the absolute certainty that only dementia can provide, that Fluffy was still somehow inside that urn, still aware, still able to hear and see and respond to the world around him. When my mother would visit, Florence would grab her by the wrist with those shaking hands and pull her toward the mantel. She would point at the urn with a trembling finger and insist that my mother say hello. Not just a casual hello, not a respectful acknowledgement of a beloved pet who had passed on. She would make my mother shake the urn, actually pick it up and rattle it back and forth, while saying hi to Fluffy in a bright, cheerful voice, like she was greeting a living dog who had just run into the room with a toy in his mouth. My mother did it, every time. She would shake that urn of ashes and say hi to a dead dog while her grandmother watched with a smile that was both happy and completely disconnected from reality. She did it because arguing with dementia is like arguing with a wall, because Florence would get upset if she refused, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is play along with their delusion even when it makes your skin crawl. Everyone in the family knew that Florence was not all there. They made jokes about it sometimes, dark jokes whispered at holiday dinners where she could not hear them, jokes about the urn and the ashes and the day she would probably try to feed Fluffy from a bowl that sat empty on the kitchen floor. They loved her, but they had accepted that her mind was gone, that the woman who had raised them and baked them cookies and told them stories about the war was now someone else, someone who lived in a world that only made sense to her. Then Aunt Lucy died. Lucy was Florence's daughter, one of several children who had grown up and moved away and built lives that did not revolve around their mother's declining health. She was not old, not the kind of old where death is expected and prepared for like a long trip you know is coming. She died suddenly, without warning, without time for goodbyes or last words, or the kind of closure that families need when someone is taken too soon. The doctors said it was her heart, a defect no one had known about, a ticking clock that had finally run out of time. The family made a decision. They would not tell Florence. Not yet. Not while she was still reeling from the loss of a dog she thought was alive in an urn on her mantel. Not while her mind was so fragile that a strong wind might shatter it completely. They would handle the funeral first, would bury Lucy, would give themselves time to grieve before they had to break the news to a woman who might not even understand what they were saying. They arranged everything with the quiet efficiency of people who are trying to outrun their own pain. They chose a funeral home, picked a casket, wrote an obituary that mentioned Lucy's kindness and her laugh and the way she made everyone feel welcome in her home. And because Lucy had been a practical woman who cared about appearances, they bought her a new dress to be buried in. A dark blue thing with small white flowers that she would have liked, that she would have worn to church on a Sunday morning without a second thought. The funeral was held with Florence nowhere near it. She stayed at home with a neighbor checking in, unaware that her daughter was being lowered into the ground while people she had never met cried into tissues and shared memories of a woman they had loved. The casket was open, a decision the family made without much debate, because Lucy looked peaceful in her new dress, and because open caskets are what people do, what is expected, what feels right, even when nothing feels right at all. What they did not know, what none of them could have known, was that Lucy had said something years before. It had been a passing comment, made at a family dinner when someone mentioned a funeral they had attended, when the conversation turned to the customs of death and the ways people say goodbye. Lucy had said, quietly but firmly, that she did not like open caskets. She did not want one for herself. She did not want people looking at her when she could not look back, did not want her face to be the last thing her family remembered, frozen and painted and wrong in a way that living faces never are. No one had taken it seriously. People say things like that all the time, make preferences known that get forgotten when the time comes, when grief takes over and practical decisions need to be made. Lucy's wishes were buried under the weight of tradition and expectation, under the belief that an open casket was the right thing to do, that it gave people closure, that it was what Lucy would have wanted if she had been thinking clearly. The day after the funeral, the family gathered at Florence's house to tell her the news. They had rehearsed what they would say, had planned the words carefully, had prepared for tears and confusion and the possibility that Florence would not understand at all. They walked through her front door with heavy hearts and practiced speeches, ready to break the heart of a woman whose heart was already broken in ways they could not fix. But Florence spoke first. She was sitting in her usual chair by the window, the one with the worn cushions and the blanket draped over the back, and she looked up when they came in with an expression that was not sad or confused or any of the things they had expected. She looked annoyed, frustrated, like someone who had been waiting for a delivery that never came. She asked them for help before they could say a single word about Lucy. She said Lucy had come by yesterday, had shown up at the door without calling, had been upset about something. Florence did not understand why Lucy was so worked up, why she kept saying the same thing over and over, why she would not calm down and have a cup of tea like a normal person. The family froze. They looked at each other with eyes that were wide and scared and trying to find an explanation that made sense. Lucy was dead. Lucy had been buried the day before. Lucy could not have come by yesterday because Lucy was in the ground, wearing her new dress, her eyes closed forever, her heart silent and still. But Florence kept talking. She said Lucy had been frantic, had paced around the living room with her hands twisting together, had kept repeating the same words like a record stuck on a scratch. "They're looking at me," Lucy had said. "I don't like them looking at me. I told you I didn't want them looking at me." The family felt the blood drain from their faces. They felt the room tilt slightly, felt the floor become unsteady beneath their feet. They knew what Lucy was talking about. They knew exactly what she meant. The open casket. The people looking at her. The thing she had said she did not want. The thing they had given her anyway. The thing that had apparently made her so upset she had come back from wherever dead people go to complain about it to her mother. They tried to reason with Florence. They told her Lucy was dead, that she had passed away suddenly, that she had been buried the day before in a beautiful ceremony with flowers and music and people who loved her. They said Lucy could not have been here yesterday because Lucy was gone, was not coming back, was never going to walk through that door again. Florence looked at them like they were the crazy ones. Dead? She said. No, she can't be. She was just here. She was right here in this room, talking to me, walking around, alive as you and me. She shook her head, confused by their insistence, annoyed by their refusal to believe something she had seen with her own eyes. And then she said, the thing that made my mother's blood run cold, the thing that she still cannot explain, no matter how many times she tells this story, no matter how many sermons she hears about the afterlife and the separation of the soul from the body and the impossibility of the dead returning to walk among the living. Florence said Lucy had been wearing the oddest dress, a dress she had never seen before, not in all the years she had known her daughter, not in any photo or memory or description Lucy had ever given her. She described it in perfect detail, every stitch and pattern and color, the dark blue fabric and the small white flowers scattered across it like stars in a night sky. It was the funeral dress, the dress the family had bought for Lucy to be buried in, the dress that had been chosen after her death, that had been purchased from a store Florence had never visited, that had been placed on her body by funeral home workers while Florence sat at home shaking an urn of dog ashes and saying hello to a pet who had been dead for months. Florence had never seen that dress. She could not have seen it. There was no photograph, no description, no way for her to know what Lucy had been wearing in her casket. The family had not told her about the dress, had not mentioned it, had not even thought to bring it up in the chaos of planning a funeral and breaking terrible news. And yet, she described it perfectly, down to the smallest detail, as if she had been standing in the room when it was chosen, as if she had helped zip it up, as if she had seen her daughter wearing it with her own 2 eyes. My mother was there. She heard her grandmother speak those words. She saw the look on Florence's face, the absolute certainty, the confusion at why no one believed her. She saw the way the rest of the family went pale, the way they stumbled over their words, the way they tried to find explanations that crumbled the moment they touched them. Was it a coincidence? Did Florence somehow guess the description of a dress she had never seen, getting every detail right by pure chance? Was it a hallucination, a trick of a mind so broken by dementia that it had learned to create realities more convincing than the truth? Or was it something else, something that my mother's faith does not have a name for, something that walked into Florence's living room the day after her own funeral and complained about the open casket she had never wanted? My mother still does not know. She has prayed about it, has talked to her pastor, has read scripture looking for answers that might explain what she witnessed. She has considered the possibility that it was a demon, an evil spirit impersonating Lucy to torment a grieving family. She has considered the possibility that it was a dream, a shared delusion, a moment of collective stress that made everyone see and hear things that were not there. But she always comes back to the same problem. Florence described the dress in perfect detail, a dress she had never seen, could not have seen, had no way of knowing existed. And Lucy had been upset about the open casket, exactly the thing she had said she did not want, the thing the family had ignored because it was easier to follow tradition than to honor a wish that had been spoken once and forgotten. My mother tells this story rarely. When she does, Her voice gets quiet, the way it does when she talks about things that matter too much to be loud about. She says she does not believe in ghosts, and I believe her. She says she believes in God and heaven and the clear separation between the living and the dead, and I believe that too. But she also says she does not know what happened in that room, does not know how Florence knew about the dress, does not know why Lucy would come back to complain about something that should not have mattered to someone who was supposed to be at peace. I think about Florence sometimes, about the woman who shook an urn of dog ashes and talked to her dead pet like he was still alive. I think about how her dementia made her see the world differently than everyone else, how it stripped away the filters that normal minds use to make sense of impossible things. Maybe that is why Lucy came to her. Maybe a broken mind is the only kind that can see what the rest of us are not supposed to see. Maybe Florence's dementia was not a weakness, but a door. A crack in the wall between what is real and what we tell ourselves is not. A way for the dead to reach back through and say the things they did not get to say while they were still breathing. Or maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a coincidence and a hallucination and a grieving family seeing patterns where there were none. Maybe my mother will go to her grave never knowing the truth, never finding the answer that lets her sleep peacefully at night. But I saw her face when she told me this story. I saw the way she looked at the wall behind me, like she was seeing something I could not see, like she was back in that room, listening to her grandmother describe a blue dress with white flowers that she should not have known existed. I saw the goosebumps on her arms, the same ones my dad gets when he tells his story, the same physical reaction that no amount of faith or skepticism can control. She believes it happened. She does not know what it means, does not have a theological box to put it in, does not understand why the rules she lives by did not seem to apply that day, but she believes it, and that is enough for me. I think about Lucy sometimes too, about the woman who came back from the dead to complain about her own funeral. I wonder what it felt like, standing in that living room, looking at her mother, who did not even know she was dead yet, trying to explain that she did not like being looked at, that she had said she did not want an open casket, that her wishes had been ignored in favor of tradition and expectation. I wonder if she was angry or sad or just confused, if the dead feel the same emotions the living do, if coming back changes anything, or if it just makes the unfairness of death more obvious. And I think about what I would do if someone I loved came back to tell me I had done something wrong. Would I listen? Would I believe them? Or would I do what the family did? Would I try to reason it away? Would I tell myself it was impossible until the evidence became too heavy to ignore? My mother still goes to church every Sunday. She still reads her Bible before bed. She still prays over every meal like God is sitting at the table with her. But she also still gets quiet when someone mentions open caskets, still changes the subject when funerals come up in conversation, still rubs her arms like she is cold even when the room is warm. She believes what she saw, and she has no idea what to think of it. That might be the scariest part of all. I was living in this apartment in Oslo that just had this weird vibe from the very first moment I stepped inside. There were 3 of us living there, 2 girls and me. This was a building from the mid-1800s, and you could feel the weight of all those years pressing down on you the second you walked through the door. The walls seemed to hold secrets, and the floorboards creaked in ways that made you wonder if someone was walking behind you when you knew you were alone. Several weird things happened there, things that still make my skin crawl when I think about them, even years later. One of the rooms I did not want to even go in. It was cold, even if the rest of the place was perfectly warm. I am not talking about a slight chill or a draft from an old window. I am talking about a bone-deep cold that wrapped around you like wet hands pulling you down into dark water. Every time I was in there, thoughts of children crying or being in some kind of peril went through my head. I cannot explain any better than that. It was not like I was imagining things or letting my mind run wild. These images just appeared, uninvited and unwelcome, like someone was broadcasting them directly into my brain. I could see small faces twisted in fear, hear faint sobs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I could not stay in there for very long. Even when I had to pass by that room to get to the bathroom or the kitchen, I would walk faster, my heart pounding, my eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look inside. Sometimes, when the apartment was quiet at night, I would hear what sounded like tiny footsteps padding across the floor in that room, soft and hesitant, like a child who did not want to be found. But when I checked, the room was always empty, and the cold would hit me like a wall. My room was the old living room, and it should have been the best room in the apartment. It was the biggest, with tall windows and high ceilings that made you feel like you were in some old European painting. But there was something wrong with it too, something I could not put my finger on until that one morning. I awoke to something growling like a big cat or snarling dog in my room. The sound was low and guttural, vibrating through the floor and up into my bed. It was not the kind of sound a normal animal makes. It was too deep, too angry, too full of something that felt ancient and hungry. I was pinned down in my bed, although nothing was there. I could feel pressure on my chest, like something heavy was sitting on me, pressing the air out of my lungs. I tried to move my arms, to sit up, to scream, but my body would not obey me. It was like my muscles had turned to stone. I could not move. I was scared out of my mind. My eyes were wide open, scanning the dark room, searching for the source of that terrible sound. But there was nothing, just shadows, and the growling, and the crushing weight on my chest. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, so hard I thought it might burst. I tried to tell myself it was sleep paralysis, that there was a scientific explanation for what was happening to me. But the growling continued, and it sounded so close, like whatever was making it was right next to my ear, breathing hot air against my neck. I lay there for what felt like hours, trapped in my own body, listening to that sound, feeling that pressure, until finally, slowly, the weight lifted, and the growling faded into silence. I sat up gasping, drenched in sweat, my hands shaking so badly I could not turn on the lamp for several minutes. When I finally did, the room looked completely normal. But I knew, deep in my gut, that something had been in there with me, something that did not want me there. After that morning, I started sleeping with every light on. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, too afraid to close my eyes, jumping at every little sound the old building made. The pipes would groan, and I would flinch. The wind would rattle the windows, and I would sit bolt upright, my heart racing. I started avoiding my own room during the day, finding excuses to stay out of the apartment, to sit in coffee shops until they closed, to wander the streets of Oslo until my feet ached. Anything was better than being in that apartment, especially in that room. One of the girls I lived with had a cat, a beautiful little thing with soft fur and bright eyes. It was only a year old, full of energy and life, always running around the apartment, chasing shadows and pouncing on dust motes in the sunlight. It was the kind of cat that made you smile just by looking at it. But even that small spark of life could not survive whatever was living in that building with us. We were just hanging out one evening, the three of us sitting in the kitchen, talking about nothing important, trying to pretend that everything was normal, that we were just three young people living in a charming old apartment, in a beautiful city. Then we heard the cat making these horrible sounds. It started as a low whine, then escalated into something that sounded like pure agony, like the cat was being torn apart from the inside. We ran to the bathroom, and what we saw there will haunt me for the rest of my life. The cat was just lying on the bathroom floor, its tongue hanging out, gasping for air, and making this horrible sound. Its eyes were wide and glassy, staring at something on the ceiling that none of us could see. Its little body was convulsing, its legs kicking out in spasms, like it was trying to run away from something that was already inside it. We tried to help it, we tried to comfort it, but there was nothing we could do. One of the girls was crying, cradling the cat in her arms, begging it to hold on, but the cat just kept making those awful sounds, its breathing becoming more and more shallow, more and more desperate. Then it died. It took like 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes felt like 10 years. The sound of that cat dying, the look in its eyes, the way its body went limp and still, it was one of the most horrifying things I have ever witnessed. And the worst part, the part that still makes me wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, was that, as the cat took its last breath, I felt the temperature in the bathroom drop suddenly, like someone had opened a door to a freezer, and for just a second, I thought I saw something dark and shapeless slip out from under the bathroom door and disappear down the hallway toward that cold room I never wanted to enter. We buried the cat the next day in a small patch of grass near the building. None of us spoke much. What was there to say? We all felt it, that heavy, suffocating presence that seemed to have grown stronger after the cat died, like whatever was in that apartment had been fed by the little life it had taken. The apartment felt different after that. The shadows seemed darker, the silences seemed louder, and that cold room felt like it was spreading, like the chill was creeping under the doors and through the walls, reaching into every corner of the place. I started having nightmares. Not normal nightmares about being late for work or showing up to class in my underwear. These were different. In my dreams, I would be back in that cold room, and I would see children, dozens of them, huddled in the corners, their faces pale and streaked with tears. They would reach out to me with tiny hands, begging me to help them, to save them, but when I tried to move toward them, the floor would turn to ice and I would slip and fall, and the children would start screaming, and the screaming would merge with the growling, and I would wake up gasping, my throat raw, my pillow soaked with sweat and tears. I told myself it was stress. I told myself I was imagining things, that living in an old building was getting to me, that the death of the cat had shaken me more than I realized. I am a very big skeptic. I do not believe in ghosts and all that stuff. I have always been the kind of person who rolls their eyes at horror movies and laughs at stories about haunted houses. I believe in what I can see and touch and explain with science, but that place was really unnerving. It got under your skin in a way that logic and reason could not fix. The other two girls were feeling it too. We stopped having conversations in the apartment. We would whisper to each other in the hallway or text each other from our separate rooms, like we were afraid that speaking out loud would attract the attention of whatever was listening. One of the girls started sleeping at her boyfriend's place almost every night. The other one took up smoking just so she would have an excuse to stand outside the building for hours at a time. We were all falling apart, and we all knew why, but none of us wanted to say it out loud. Saying it would make it real, and we were not ready for that. Then came the night that finally broke me. I was alone in the apartment, which was rare. Both of the girls were out, and I had nowhere to go, no one to visit, no money for a coffee shop. I was sitting in the kitchen with every light on, trying to read a book, trying to distract myself from the sounds the building was making. The pipes were groaning louder than usual, and there was a new sound, a kind of rhythmic tapping, like someone was knocking on the walls from inside them. I tried to ignore it, turning up the music on my phone, singing along to songs I did not know the words to, just to hear a human voice. Then the tapping stopped, and the apartment went completely silent. Not the normal silence of an empty room, but a heavy, pressing silence, like the air itself had been sucked out of the space. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and fast, and beneath it, something else. Breathing, slow, deep, wet breathing, coming from the direction of that cold room. I sat frozen in my chair, my book forgotten in my lap, my eyes fixed on the dark hallway that led to the room I feared most. The breathing grew louder, closer, and with it came the cold, creeping along the floor like a living thing, wrapping around my ankles, climbing up my legs. I wanted to run, to get up and bolt out of the apartment and never come back, but my body would not move. Just like that morning in my bed, I was trapped, paralyzed by fear, unable to do anything but sit there and listen as the breathing came closer and closer. Then I heard it. A voice. Not a clear voice, not words that I could understand, but a whisper, soft and broken, like a child trying to speak through tears. It was coming from right behind me, but when I finally managed to turn my head, there was nothing there. Just the empty kitchen, the flickering lights, and the cold that had now wrapped itself around my entire body, making my teeth chatter and my hands shake. The whisper came again, this time from the hallway, and then from the living room, and then from right beside my ear. And each time it was a little louder, a little clearer, until I could almost make out what it was saying. It sounded like "help me," or maybe it was "help us," or maybe it was something else entirely, something in a language I did not understand, something old and angry and full of pain. I do not remember how I got out of that chair. I do not remember running down the hallway or grabbing my keys or flinging open the front door. The next thing I knew, I was standing on the street outside the building, gasping for air, my face wet with tears I did not remember crying. I looked up at the windows of our apartment, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a small face pressed against the glass of that cold room, pale and wide-eyed, watching me. Then it was gone, and the window was just a window, dark and empty. I moved out of that place shortly after. I packed my things in a single afternoon, throwing clothes into bags without folding them, not caring what I broke or left behind. I did not say goodbye to the apartment. I did not look back. I walked out of that building, and I never went back, not even to return a borrowed book or pick up a piece of mail I had forgotten. Some things are not worth going back for. I am a very big skeptic. I do not believe in ghosts and all that stuff. I have spent years trying to rationalize what happened in that apartment. I have told myself it was sleep paralysis, carbon monoxide, stress, old pipes, drafts, the power of suggestion, anything and everything that science can explain. And maybe it was all of those things. Maybe there was a logical reason for every single thing I experienced. But deep down, in the part of my mind that wakes up at 3 a.m. and stares at the ceiling, I know the truth. That place was wrong. Something bad had happened there, long before I ever set foot inside. And that something had never left. It was still there, in the cold room, in the shadows, in the walls, waiting for the next person foolish enough to think they could live in a house that did not want them there. Sometimes, when I am lying in bed in my new apartment, in a bright modern building with good heating and no history, I still hear that growling. I still feel that pressure on my chest. I still see those pale faces in my dreams, reaching out to me with tiny hands, begging me to save them. And sometimes, just sometimes, When the room is dark and quiet and I am on the edge of sleep, I feel that familiar cold creeping up my legs, and I know, with a certainty that makes my blood run ice cold, that it has found me again, that it never really let me go, that it is only a matter of time before I wake up one morning, pinned to my bed, listening to that terrible growling, and this time, there will be no escape. When I was 15 or maybe 16 years old, something happened in our house that I have never been able to explain. No matter how many years pass or how hard I try to convince myself it was just a child's imagination. I was old enough to know when something was truly wrong, old enough to feel the kind of fear that sinks into your bones and stays there forever. And what my little sister said that day changed the way I look at everything. It made me question whether death is really the end, whether the things we carry with us in this life are heavier than we ever realize, and whether some souls are born already broken by memories they should not have. My sister was only 3 or 4 years old at the time. She was this tiny little thing with big, curious eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. She followed our parents around like a shadow, copying everything they did, from the way our dad stirred his coffee to the way our mom brushed her hair. Kids that age are like sponges, soaking up the world around them, trying on adult behaviors like costumes. We never thought much of it when she would grab a coffee mug and pretend to drink, or pick up a phone and babble into it like she was having a real conversation. It was cute. It was normal. It was what little kids do. But one afternoon, something went terribly wrong. Our parents were not home. I think they had gone to the grocery store or maybe to run some errands. I was supposed to be watching my sister, and I was, or at least I thought I was. She had been playing quietly in her room, and I was in the living room doing homework or watching television. Something typical and boring. Then I heard a strange sound coming from the bathroom, a kind of gagging noise, and my stomach dropped. I ran down the hallway and found her standing by the sink, holding an empty bottle of green nail polish remover. The cap was off, and there was a little of that sharp chemical smell in the air. She had gotten it from the bathroom sink. It looked like mouthwash, that same kind of green liquid you see in commercials, the kind that promises fresh breath and a clean mouth. We guessed she was imitating our parents, trying to do what grown-ups do, not understanding that some things that look safe are actually poison. I grabbed the bottle from her hands and screamed for my older brother to call for help. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone when I tried to dial. My sister was already starting to look pale, her little face twisted in confusion and discomfort. She did not cry at first. She just looked at me with these wide eyes, like she was trying to tell me something, but did not have the words. I picked her up and held her close, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept saying her name over and over, telling her she was going to be okay, that help was coming, that I was right there. But inside, I was terrified. I had never been so scared in my entire life. Our neighborhood pharmacy had an assistant rush over some Ipcac and something else. I think it might have been Malox, but honestly, I do not remember exactly. My mind was a blur of panic and prayer. The assistant was this kind older woman who moved with a calm urgency that somehow made things feel a little less hopeless. She gave my sister the medicine and told us to keep her awake, to keep her talking, to not let her fall asleep. She said an ambulance was on its way, but until then, we had to watch her every second. I sat on the bathroom floor with my sister in my lap, my arms wrapped around her tiny body, feeling her heartbeat against my chest and trying not to imagine what would happen if it stopped. While we were waiting for the ambulance, the house felt impossibly quiet. My brother was pacing in the hallway, muttering under his breath, probably praying. The pharmacy assistant was on the phone with someone, giving updates in a low, steady voice. And I was just there, on that cold bathroom floor, holding my sister and watching her face for any sign that she was getting worse. She was in pain. You could see it in the way she squeezed her eyes shut, in the way her little hands clutched at my shirt, in the soft whimpers that escaped her lips. I wanted to take that pain away, to trade places with her, to do anything to make it stop. But all I could do was hold her and wait. Then she opened her eyes. They were glassy and unfocused at first, like she was looking through me instead of at me. Her breathing was shallow and fast, and her skin felt clammy against my arms. I thought she was about to pass out, and panic surged through me like electricity. I shook her gently, calling her name, begging her to stay awake. And then she spoke. Her voice was different, not the high-pitched little girl voice I knew, but something deeper, something tired and sad, like it belonged to someone much older, someone who had seen too much and lived too long. She looked right at me, and she said, "I drank some green stuff and died one time." The words came out slow and deliberate, like she was remembering something from a long time ago, something she had buried deep inside herself. I froze. My brother stopped pacing. The pharmacy assistant lowered her phone and stared. None of us said anything. We just watched my sister's face, waiting for her to laugh or giggle or say she was just pretending, the way kids do. But she did not. She kept talking, and what she said next made the room feel 10 degrees colder. "My husband ran off with a girl," she said, her little voice carrying a weight that no 3-year-old should ever know. And I got sad. I got so sad I could not breathe. So I drank some green stuff, and I died. My girls were crying and sad when I died. They were holding my hands and saying, "Mama, please do not go." But I went anyway. I went away, and then I was here. She said it all so matter-of-factly, like she was telling me about a movie she had watched or a book she had read. But there was something in her eyes, something ancient and hollow, that made my skin crawl. For a moment, she did not look like my baby sister at all. She looked like a stranger, wearing her face, someone who had carried grief so heavy it had crushed the life out of her. I could not speak. My mouth was dry, and my tongue felt like it was stuck to the roof of my mouth. My brother made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a choke, and I heard him whisper something that might have been a prayer or a curse. I could not tell. The pharmacy assistant crossed herself, her face pale and drawn. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, like the walls were closing in on us, like the air was being squeezed out of the room. I looked down at my sister, still cradled in my arms, and I felt this overwhelming sense of wrongness, like I was holding something I did not understand, something that was both my sister and not my sister at the same time. She closed her eyes then, and her breathing slowed, and for one terrible second, I thought she was gone. I shook her harder, my voice breaking as I called her name, tears streaming down my face. Then her eyes fluttered open again, and she was back. She was my little sister again, confused and scared and in pain, but herself. She looked up at me with those big familiar eyes and said, "My tummy hurts," in the same sweet voice she always used. The older voice, the tired voice, was gone, but I could not unhear what she had said. I could not unsee the look in her eyes when she talked about her husband and her girls and the green stuff she drank to die. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later, and the paramedics took over. They checked her vitals, gave her more treatment, and rushed her to the hospital. My parents met us there, and they were frantic, demanding to know what happened, why we were not watching her more carefully, how she could have gotten into something so dangerous. I tried to explain, but every time I opened my mouth I heard my sister's voice in my head, saying those impossible things, and the words would not come out. What was I supposed to say? That while she was dying on our bathroom floor, she told us about her suicide in a previous life, that my 3-year-old sister remembered having a husband who left her, children who cried over her body, and drinking poison to end her pain. It sounded insane. It sounded like something out of a horror movie or a bad dream. But I was there. I heard it. I felt the cold that filled that bathroom when she spoke. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that it was real. My sister is fine now. She made a full recovery, and she has no memory of that day. She is a happy, healthy young woman with a life full of friends and laughter and normal problems. She does not remember the green nail polish remover or the bathroom floor or the things she said. When I have tried to bring it up over the years, she looks at me like I am crazy, like I am making up stories for attention. And part of me wishes she was right. Part of me wishes I could convince myself that it was just the poison talking, that a 3-year-old brain exposed to toxic chemicals will say all kinds of strange things, that there is a scientific explanation for everything if you look hard enough. But I was there. I saw her face. I heard her voice. And I felt the presence of something in that bathroom that day. Something that had nothing to do with medicine or chemistry or child development. When she talked about her husband running off with another woman, about the sadness that swallowed her whole, about her girls crying as she slipped away, she was not making it up. She was remembering. She was reliving a moment of such profound despair that it had followed her across the barrier of death and into a new life, into a new body, into a new family that had no idea what she was carrying inside her. I have spent years trying to understand what happened. I have read books about reincarnation, about children who remember past lives, about near-death experiences, and the mysteries of consciousness. Some of it sounds convincing, some of it sounds like nonsense, but nothing I have read has ever made me feel less afraid than I felt that day on the bathroom floor. Because if what my sister said was true, then death is not an escape. The pain we carry does not dissolve when our bodies do. It follows us. It finds us. It sits inside us like a seed, waiting for the right moment to sprout and remind us of who we used to be and what we used to suffer. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and I am alone with my thoughts, I wonder about the woman my sister used to be. I wonder what her name was, what her life was like, whether she was a good mother, whether she loved her husband before he broke her heart. I wonder if she knew, in those final moments on that bathroom floor in her previous life, that she would be reborn, that she would get a second chance, that one day she would be a little girl again, innocent and unaware, drinking green poison from a bottle that looked like mouthwash. I wonder if she felt relief when the darkness took her, or if she felt regret, or if she felt nothing at all. And then I wonder about the rest of us. How many people walking around right now are carrying memories they do not understand, feelings that do not belong to this life, grief that has no source in their current reality. How many children wake up screaming from nightmares about events they never lived through? How many adults feel sudden, inexplicable sadness in certain places, around certain people, for reasons they cannot name? If my sister could remember dying by her own hand, could remember the faces of children she left behind, could remember the color of the poison that ended her pain, then what else is hiding inside the minds of the people we love? What else is waiting to surface when we are at our most vulnerable, when the barriers between this life and the last are worn thin by pain or fear, or the simple confusion of being human? The house we lived in back then is gone now. My parents sold it and moved to a smaller place after we all grew up and left. I have not been back to that neighborhood in years, and I do not think I ever will, but I still dream about that bathroom sometimes. In the dream, I am sitting on the floor again, holding my sister, and she is looking up at me with those ancient eyes, and she is saying the same words over and over. I drank some green stuff and died one time. My husband ran off with a girl and I got sad and drank some green stuff and died. My girls were crying and sad when I died. And in the dream, I always ask her the same question. I ask her what her name was, what her girls' names were, where she lived when this happened. But she never answers. She just keeps looking at me with that hollow, knowing expression. And then she fades away, and I wake up gasping, my heart racing, my pillow wet with tears I do not remember crying. My sister is fine. She is more than fine. She is thriving. She has a good job and good friends and a bright future ahead of her. But every time I look at her, every time I hear her laugh or see her smile, I think about that other woman, the one who lived inside her for a few terrifying minutes on a bathroom floor when she was 3 years old. I think about the green stuff she drank, the sadness that consumed her, the children she left behind. And I wonder if, somewhere deep inside her, that woman is still there, sleeping, waiting, remembering. I wonder if one day, when my sister is older, when she has lived enough of this life to understand the weight of loss and betrayal and despair, those memories will come back. I wonder if she will wake up one morning and know, with the same terrible clarity she had as a child, exactly who she used to be and exactly how she died. I hope not. I pray not. Because some things are better left buried. Some memories are too heavy for any soul to carry, no matter how many lives it lives. And some green stuff, once swallowed, leaves a stain that never really washes away, no matter how many years pass or how many new beginnings we are given. My sister may not remember, but I do. I remember every word, every look, every chill that ran down my spine. And I know that somewhere, in some life that is not this one, a woman drank green poison in a bathroom and died alone, and her girls cried, and her heart broke, and the world moved on without her. Until she came back, until she was my sister, until she told me the truth, in a voice that was not her own, on a floor that was cold and hard and far too close to the edge of forever. When I lived with my parents, there was one Saturday that started out completely normal and ended up being the most terrifying day of my entire life. I had spent the day at a friend's house, just hanging out, watching movies, eating junk food, doing the kind of stuff teenagers do when they think the world is safe and boring and nothing bad ever really happens to people like them. I left my friend's place in the late afternoon. The sun was still up, and I remember feeling relaxed and happy as I walked home. My parents were supposed to be home. They had told me that morning they were going to be working in the backyard all day, doing some kind of yard work, maybe trimming trees or cleaning up leaves. Nothing unusual, nothing to worry about. But when I got to our front door, something felt off right away. The house was quiet, not the normal quiet of a lazy afternoon, but a heavy, pressing silence. The kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up before you even know why. I turned my key in the lock and pushed the door open, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was metallic and thick, like the air inside a butcher shop on a hot day, and it hit me so hard I almost gagged. I called out, "Hello," my voice echoing through the empty hallway. No one answered. I said it again, louder this time, "Hello, Mom, Dad, anyone home?" Still nothing. Just that awful silence, and that smell, getting stronger with every step I took into the house. My parents were supposed to be there. They had no plans to go anywhere. They were supposed to be in the backyard, or the kitchen, or somewhere, doing normal parent things, making noise, living their lives. But the house felt abandoned. like everyone had vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but that terrible stillness and the smell that was making my stomach churn. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself they had probably gone to the store or to visit a neighbor and I had just missed them. But my hands were shaking as I closed the front door behind me, and my heart was beating way too fast for something as simple as an empty house. I walked around and checked the living room first. Everything looked normal at a glance. The couch, the television, the coffee table with its usual clutter of magazines and remote controls. But the smell was stronger in here, and as I moved closer to the kitchen doorway, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There was a smear of red on the wall, low down near the baseboard, like someone had dragged a bloody hand along the paint. It was not a lot, just a streak, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I stood there staring at it, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Maybe my mom had cut herself cooking. Maybe my dad had nicked his hand on a tool. Maybe it was paint, or ketchup, or some kind of weird prank. But deep down, I knew it was blood. I just knew. I forced myself to keep moving. I checked the bedrooms next, calling out for my parents with a voice that was getting weaker and more frightened with every empty room I found. Their bed was made. My room was untouched. The bathroom was clean except for a few drops of red on the white tile floor near the sink. Drops that looked too fresh, too wet, too real. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. Something was very wrong. I could feel it in every nerve in my body, this primal instinct screaming at me to run, to get out, to not look any further. But I had to know. I had to find my parents. I had to understand what had happened in this house while I was gone. I decided to check the kitchen for a note or something. That was the logical thing to do, right? If they had gone somewhere in a hurry, they would have left a message, a phone number, some kind of explanation. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, and with every step, that metallic smell got stronger and stronger, until it was all I could taste, all I could breathe. My eyes were watering, my throat was tight, and then I turned the corner into the kitchen, and the world stopped. There was blood everywhere. I do not mean a little bit of blood. I do not mean a cut finger or a scraped knee. I mean blood covering every surface, every wall, every inch of that kitchen, like someone had taken a bucket of it and thrown it around the room in a frenzy. It was clear that something very bad had happened. The sink was full of it, dark and thick, pooling around the drain. The countertop was splattered with it, great arcs of red that reached all the way to the ceiling. The floors were slick with it, puddles of it gathering in the corners, dripping down the cabinets, making the tiles look like they were made of something alive and bleeding. I stood there in the doorway, my mouth hanging open, my mind completely blank, unable to process what I was seeing. This was not real. This could not be real. This was the kind of thing you saw in horror movies, in crime scene photos, in nightmares. Not in your own kitchen, not in your own home. I got this ill feeling, this deep, sick sensation that started in my stomach and spread through my entire body like poison. My legs felt weak. My vision was swimming. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. I wanted to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. All I could do was stand there and stare at the blood, at the impossible amount of blood, and try to make sense of a scene that made no sense at all. How could one person bleed this much? How could anyone survive losing this much blood? Where were my parents? Were they dead? Were they dying somewhere in this house, hidden in a closet or a basement, their bodies cold and still while I stood here doing nothing? I forced myself to move. I had to call for help. I had to call the police, an ambulance, someone, anyone. I looked around for the phone, and I saw it on the wall near the refrigerator. The old landline we still kept, even though everyone had cell phones now. I stumbled toward it, my shoes slipping on the wet floor, my hands reaching out for the receiver. And then I saw it. The phone was covered in blood. The handset, the buttons, the cord, everything was coated in that dark, sticky red, like someone had picked it up with bloody hands and tried to make a call before collapsing. I pulled my hand back like the phone had burned me, and I stood there, frozen in fear, staring at the blood-spattered wall by the phone, my mind completely empty of anything but terror. And then it dawned on me. Whoever did this could still be in the house. The thought hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of my lungs. I had been so focused on the blood, on finding my parents, on calling for help, that I had not even considered the most obvious and horrifying possibility. If someone had hurt my parents, if someone had done this terrible thing, they might still be here. They might be hiding in a closet, or in the basement, or in the garage, waiting for me to come closer, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what they started. I was alone in a house full of blood, and there was a killer somewhere in the shadows, and I had just walked right into their trap like an idiot. My eyes followed the blood down the wall to the floor, tracing the path of destruction like a roadmap of horror. And there, near the baseboard, I saw it. The blood trailed toward the doors to the garage and the basement. 2 doors, 2 dark places, 2 possible hiding spots for whatever monster had turned my kitchen into an abattoir. The trail was thick and wet, still glistening, still fresh. Whatever had happened here had happened recently. Minutes ago, maybe, while I was walking home, whistling to myself, thinking about what I was going to have for dinner. While I was living my normal, stupid teenage life, someone was in my house, destroying everything I loved. I immediately darted out the front door. I do not remember making the decision to run. I do not remember my legs moving. 1 second I was staring at that blood trail, paralyzed by fear, and the next second I was outside, running down the driveway, screaming for help at the top of my lungs. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, high and broken and desperate, like an animal caught in a trap. I ran into the middle of the street, looking around wildly for someone. Anyone. A neighbor, a passerby. Anyone who could hear me and call the police and save me from whatever was in that house. And then I saw it. A cop car was pulling into the driveway, its lights flashing, followed closely by my mom's car. I stopped running. I stood there in the street, my chest heaving, my whole body trembling, watching as my mom jumped out of the driver's seat. And then I saw her. She was covered in blood. Her shirt, her hands, her face, everything was coated in that same dark red I had just seen all over our kitchen. She looked like she had been through a war. She looked like she had been attacked, or worse. My heart stopped. My knees buckled. I thought she was dying. I thought she was already dead and just did not know it yet. But then she yelled something that made no sense at all. She yelled, "We have to find Dad's finger." Those words hung in the air like something from a nightmare, something too bizarre and horrible to be real. For a split second, my brain refused to process them. I just stood there, staring at my mother, covered in blood, standing next to a police car, screaming about finding my father's finger. And then the relief hit me, if you can call it relief. My parents were alive. They were not dead in a closet somewhere. They were not victims of some random act of violence. But my father had lost a finger. That explained the blood. That explained everything. And somehow, in the middle of all that terror, I felt this strange mix of gratitude and horror, like my body did not know whether to laugh, or cry, or throw up. I soon somewhat found relief in discovering my parents were alive and well, or at least as well as you can be when one of you is missing a finger and the other one is drenched in blood. My father had just lost his finger while using the chipper shredder in the backyard. That was it. That was the explanation. No killer, no home invasion, no nightmare scenario of finding my parents murdered. Just a terrible accident, a split second of carelessness with a powerful machine, and a finger that was now somewhere in a pile of wood chips, waiting to be found. The police officer got out of his car and started asking questions, his voice calm and professional, the kind of voice that comes from seeing too many terrible things and learning how to stay detached. My mom was frantic, pacing back and forth, wiping blood from her face with a hand that was also covered in blood, leaving streaks of red across her cheeks like war paint. She kept saying, "We have to find it, we have to find it," over and over, like a mantra, like if she said it enough times the finger would just appear in her hand. I stood there, still shaking, still trying to process the fact that I had just walked through a crime scene that was actually just an accident scene, and that my father was somewhere nearby, probably in shock, probably in pain, missing a piece of himself that he would never get back. Along with the police, my mom and I looked through the wood chip pile for Dad's finger. The backyard was a mess. The chipper shredder sat there like some kind of mechanical monster, its blades still stained with blood, the motor still warm to the touch. The pile of wood chips was huge, a mountain of shredded bark and leaves and branches, and somewhere in there, buried under all that debris, was my father's finger. We dug through it with our hands, sifting through the chips, our fingers getting splinters and cuts, our clothes getting dirty and stained. The police officer helped too, using a rake to move the bigger pieces aside, his face unreadable behind his sunglasses. We searched for what felt like hours, but to no avail. The finger was gone, swallowed up by the machine and the pile, lost in the chaos of shredded wood and dried leaves. My father was sitting on the back porch steps, his hand wrapped in a bloody towel, his face pale and drawn. He was not crying, but his eyes had this hollow look, like he was staring at something far away, something none of us could see. Every now and then he would look down at his hand, at the place where his finger used to be, and his face would twist with a mixture of pain and disbelief. I wanted to go to him, to hug him, to tell him it was going to be okay, but I did not know how. I had never seen my father look so small, so vulnerable, so broken. He was always the strong one, the fixer, the man who could handle anything. And now he was sitting on our porch, missing a finger, watching his wife and daughter dig through a pile of wood chips like they were searching for buried treasure, except the treasure was a piece of his own body. To this day, he has one less digit. The finger was never found, not during that initial search, not in the days that followed. My father learned to live without it, adapted his grip, changed the way he held tools and shook hands and tied his shoes. But I know he never forgot. I know he still thinks about it sometimes, in the quiet moments when he is alone, when he looks at his hand and counts 4 fingers instead of 5, and remembers the machine that took the 5th one away. The day after the accident, I was told to put the chipper shredder away and move the pile. My parents wanted the backyard cleaned up, wanted the reminder of what had happened gone, wanted to move on and pretend that everything was normal again. I did not want to do it. I did not want to touch that machine, did not want to dig through that pile, did not want to relive the horror of the day before, but I did it anyway. I dragged the chipper shredder into the garage, my hands still shaking, my stomach still churning every time I looked at those bloody blades. And then I started moving the wood chip pile, shoveling the chips into a wheelbarrow, dumping them in the corner of the yard where we kept compost. And that is when I found it. I was about halfway through the pile, my arms aching, my back sore, my mind wandering to anything but the task at hand, when my shovel hit something that did not feel like wood. It was soft, yielding, almost rubbery. I stopped. I looked down, and there, half buried in the chips, was my father's finger. It was white and fleshy, almost fake-looking, but it was real. The skin was pale and waxy, like a piece of wax fruit or one of those fake body parts they sell at Halloween stores. But the texture was wrong. It was too soft, too organic, too clearly a piece of a human being. The nail was still attached, clean and intact, and I could see the knuckle where it had been severed, the bone and tendon exposed, dried and darkened by a day of sitting in the sun and the wood chips. I did not want to touch it. The thought of picking it up with my bare hands made me want to scream and run, and never come back. So I picked it up with 2 sticks, like I was handling a dead animal or a piece of garbage, pinching it between the wood and lifting it out of the pile. It was lighter than I expected, this tiny piece of my father that had been lost and found, this ghost of a body part that should have been attached to a hand, but was now just a thing, an object, something to be carried on sticks and shown to the person it used to belong to. I brought it in to my father. He was sitting in his favorite chair in the living room, his bandaged hand resting in his lap, staring at the television without really watching it. When I walked in with the finger held out in front of me on those 2 sticks, his eyes went wide. He did not say anything at first. He just stared at it, at this piece of himself that had come back to him after a day of being lost, and his face crumpled. He cried at its belated discovery. Not loud sobs, not dramatic wailing, but quiet tears running down his cheeks, his shoulders shaking, his good hand covering his mouth like he was trying to hold back the grief that was pouring out of him. I had never seen my father cry before. It was one of the most heartbreaking things I have ever witnessed, this strong man reduced to tears by the sight of his own severed finger, this reminder of his own fragility, his own mortality. We buried it in the backyard later that day, next to our old dog. The dog had died a few years earlier, and we had marked his grave with a small stone and some flowers that had long since wilted. My father dug the hole himself, one-handed, his bandaged hand tucked against his chest, using the shovel with his good hand and his foot, his face set in a grim expression of determination and sorrow. I stood next to him, holding the finger wrapped in a clean white cloth, waiting for him to finish. When the hole was deep enough, he took the cloth from me and placed it gently in the ground, like he was burying a pet, like he was saying goodbye to something that mattered. We stood there in silence for a long time, my father and I, looking down at that small patch of disturbed earth. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the backyard looked peaceful and normal, like nothing terrible had ever happened there. But I knew the truth. I knew that beneath that dirt, beneath the grass and the flowers and the memory of our old dog, there was a piece of my father that would never grow back, never heal, never be whole again. And I knew that every time I walked through that kitchen, every time I smelled that metallic scent of blood, every time I saw a wood chip pile or a chipper shredder or even a bandaged hand, I would remember this day. I would remember the terror of walking into that silent house, the horror of seeing all that blood, the relief and the grief of finding my parents alive but broken, and the strange, sad beauty of burying a finger in the backyard as the sun went down. My father is fine now. He jokes about his missing finger sometimes, calls it his 9-finger discount, makes light of it in a way that makes people uncomfortable but also makes them laugh. He learned to adapt, to compensate, to live with the loss, but I see the way he looks at his hand sometimes, when he thinks no one is watching. I see the way his face changes, just for a second, from cheerful to something else, something darker and deeper, and I know that inside him, in the place where memories live and nightmares grow, There is a kitchen covered in blood, a wood chip pile hiding a secret, and a finger that came home too late to be saved. And sometimes, when I am alone in that house, when my parents are out and the silence gets too heavy, I swear I can hear it. A soft tapping, like a finger drumming against a window, or a wall, or the inside of a coffin buried in the backyard. I tell myself, it is the wind, or the house settling, or my imagination running wild. But deep down, in the part of me that will never forget that Saturday, I know better. I know that some things, once lost, do not stay lost forever. Some things find their way back, and some things, no matter how hard you bury them, never really die.